Inside Outside, a podcast that explores educational interests from both inside and outside of education. I'm Jeff Bailey, an education insider.
And I'm John Gonzalez, the education outsider. Jeff and I are excited to explore various topics related to education from multiple perspectives.
No matter what you do in the field of education, this podcast is for you.
We'll be speaking with a variety of guests to gain a better understanding of what's working and what's not in education.
Our goal is to spark meaningful conversation and encourage new ways of thinking and looking at education, ultimately hoping to inspire positive change and progress. We welcome you to Inside Outside and can't wait to explore the fascinating world of education together.
This episode, as in other episodes, we're taking a look at how AI is demanding change in education, specifically how student learning is assessed.
Today, John and I will be talking about key changes that schools must make to survive the AI revolution. And it seems like, John, we've been talking about AI a lot. We've done 4 episodes. We were talking earlier about how this was not supposed to be like an AI podcast, and now it's changed into that. And so, but then I said I was thinking about rebranding this podcast, and then I thought, well, no, this really is the issue. This is the, I guess this is a seminal moment in education. And so we have to take advantage of it. So,
well, education is kind of leading the charge in this. There's a lot going on in the world of artificial intelligence. No question about that. As a journalist, I always follow the trends, what's happening, because you're also part of the trend. What they say about journalism is that you're the first draft of history, right? So in order to be in the first draft, the early part of history, you've got to be on top of the trends and what's happening in the world. So in artificial intelligence, AI, and where it's going is definitely a part of that. Where I find it really interesting from the outsider perspective, from outside of education, is how it affects not only teachers and students, but administration as well. And that's where it is exploding. We talked earlier off the air in the kind of the pre-show thing about how universities are dealing with that in admissions. There's so much to cover. That's why every week we'll stick with the topic.
Yeah, it's very true. I actually, speaking of that, you talked about from your perspective and that from a journalist that you're sort of the first draft. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that in education, we're sort of like the original draft.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And first draft and original draft, they sound like they're the same thing. But what I mean is that there's only been one draft of education, and it's really been done pretty much the same. I've been in education over 30 years, and things really aren't that different. Even though I work in educational technology, things are not that different.
That's fascinating because I've been in journalism for 30 years and things are drastically different, right?
Yeah, that's been totally disrupted. That field has been totally disrupted. And I think that's what is going to happen in education. I was reading some articles this week. The headlines are, AI is going to lead to human extinction. And I guess you could see where that could go. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. Another article that I saw talked about AI being like nuclear war. And maybe, that's still hyperbole, but I think that it's closer because a nuclear war basically would mean, hey, you got to start everything over. So,
yeah. Well, and this is why to me as a journalist, it's so fascinating. So, I just like the word hyperbole, though. That's a fun word to say.
Hyperbole.
The
hyperbole. We're going to the hyperbole this year.
What would your English brain say to teachers or to students how to explain the word hyperbole?
Hyperbole. Well, I think it's exaggeration for effect. Mm-hmm. You're trying to really draw attention. Yeah. For whatever reason.
Yeah.
Right now, if you're on Twitter at all and you're looking at like Detroit Lions stuff, because we're both Lions fans. There's a lot of hyperbole out there. We're going to the Super Bowl. Jared Goff's the greatest quarterback ever. And we all believe that, but it's all a good example of hyperbole.
Yeah, well, my journalist hat still thinks, no, Jared Goff is not the greatest quarterback ever. But as you know, you gave me my first drink of Kool-Aid, so I'll be there with you and rooting on the Lions as they make it to the Super Bowl this year. So
yeah, as a Lions fan, hyperbole is how you get on. You're We're going to the hyperbole again this year.
I was at a party one time, and we'll get back to education, folks. But I was at a Super Bowl or at a NFL party, Lions party, should say. And it was the first game of one of those years where we're supposed to win it all, right? And the Lions scored a touchdown, and they're leading, and the fans are going crazy. And all of a sudden, that was halftime. After halftime, it was a total blowout. We got killed. And in the first half, someone yelled, "We're going to the Super Bowl!" And the place is screaming, right? Second half, as we're getting shelled, they're going, we're going to the toilet bowl.
Toilet bowl.
Everybody's laughing and cheering. But that's the life of a Lions fan. Let's keep it back on track here to education. And I know that for students and teachers alike, in the struggle of like how to maintain everything, I'm curious about assessing how AI and how education assesses students. I mean, we talked about how education is kind of stuck in the old way. I would imagine the schools have to deal with this process right away.
Schools, it's like I said, what hasn't changed in education? So we have all these different tools, that have probably dramatically affected your field. Technology is dramatic. I mean, we talk about backpack journalism. Now you can do it all. You don't have to have a photographer with you. You don't have to have a videographer with you, because all of those things fit in the palm of your hand. And so that has changed your field.
Right.
You have far fewer people doing that job than you would have 30 years ago when I started in education. So education doesn't work that way, though. We have all these tools, but the adoption of them has been spotty at best. And you hear about them, but you only hear about them because you're hearing like the best case scenario. Most teachers, and I have this conversation all the time with people, they're so caught up in the traditional way of this is the way school's supposed to be, not this is what school should be.
Right.
And so, I think the AI thing is really bringing up a big issue. I listened to a podcast with a Harvard researcher, Chris, I think it's Dede, and he had a great quote, and it's really stuck with me, and this has brought many conversations with me. And it says that the trick about AI is that to get it, we need to change what we're educating people, because if you educate people for what AI does well, we're really just training people to be beaten by AI, to lose to AI, because so many of the things that we have to do, like having kids write papers, AI can write a pretty decent paper. If it's taking tests, AI can take any test that a teacher's created now and pass it really well. So if we keep educating that way, we're just going to teach kids to lose. And so, I mean, we have to look at like jobs are going to change. The expectations of what a person can do, it has to change.
Everything will change and is already changing. I mean, you mentioned, AI can answer the questions on a test. AI is creating the test, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've actually, my teachers, I've told them you should have AI creating your test. You should use AI so that it clears up time for you to do other things.
Right.
And to me, that's a selling point. Okay, there are things that we do as teachers that we do all the time. We're recreating multiple choice tests. We're coming up with essay questions. We're looking for research. Well, AI can do that stuff for us. We don't need to do that. So when you look at that, though, you say, okay, so if we don't need to do those because AI can do that, why are we teaching kids to do that?
Well, I guess my question is this, like, because I'm the outsider, and I'm learning every day about education and how it works. So it's graduation time here at our school, right? Yep. And their students are getting ready for exams next week. Well, are those exams going to be like we did exams last year and the year before and 10 years ago?
I would say, I would say yes. And our principal has been really, we've been working on this for a year about, how are we going to assess kids? And, it's been a difficult push uphill, and we consider ourselves to be we're a high quality school, and we really want the best for kids, but it has been a push to really get teachers to say, you can't use that. I can't use the same test because it's really not a valid way of seeing how kids learn. And this process is going to take a year or two more. I mean, it's the schools that are just putting their head in the sand. They're going to be really far behind the curve.
Do you think parents and students are going to demand that schools, are forward thinking? That, like, I'm not going to say you have school of choice, you have private schools, you have home schools, you have different education options for high school, right? And even middle school, grade school. You have all these different options. Are parents now going to, like, hey, you know what? What are we teaching our kids, and how are they learning, and how are we assessing what they learn?
You know what? The sad answer is I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah. The reason I don't think so is because, well, one of the questions I was going to ask you is how is school? So you graduate. What year did you graduate?
Do we have to? Let's say in the 80s. How about that?
Me too. So I graduated in the 80s. So John, how has school changed since you were in school? Now, you've been here a year.
Yeah.
You've seen the school. Our school's probably, more traditional than most. But how has school changed to you?
So the biggest change that was an eye-opener for me when I walked into the school for the first time, I, of course, was looking for the library. For me, that's where, when I grew up, the library was the center of life. If we had computers, it was going to be in the library. If we had interesting books to read or research to be done, as a journalist, you were doing a lot of research. Even in high school, I was a high school journalist. I was in the library. That's where I did my research.
Right.
Well, when I got here, I think we have a library. It's a small little window with a few books.
That's exactly my reaction when I first got here too. Do the classes seem different though? Do you think
No.
think young John Gonzalez could walk right back into those classes and feel like, yeah, I can do this?
The only big difference was the touch screens, the boards. The chalkboard's gone, but actually my classroom I had last year had a chalkboard, but we never used it except to draw things.
Right.
I like that. Everything is there. Everyone has iPads. Where in my school, you're still looking for a number 2 pencil, in notebooks and so forth. But so that would be the biggest change. Other than that, it still feels like a school. There's still lockers.
Yep.
There's still kids going to practices, kids going after school activities, play rehearsals, but everything also seems very familiar.
It is very familiar. And that is why I answered the way I did, that they're not going to demand change. They'll just go along with it. Because it's comfortable, it's easy, it's what they did, it's what they expect. And I said that about teachers too. Teachers want their class to feel like the way they learned. And it's a fundamental truth that teachers loved the subject that they learned.
Right.
And so, wow, I learned math that well. That was a great class. Or, those same people say, oh, I was not a good English student. English classes should be totally different. Mm-hmm. But they look at their own subject matter and they're like, oh, I learned it really well here. This is the way it should continue to be. And so a lot of it is going to be, the future must be letting go of the sacred cows of education. And actually, how many years do we have to get beaten by AI? When you start to see, I'm starting to see it now. You think back when we went to that Lions game last year, and you could put your drink on a thing and it would scan it. You put your hot dog there, it would scan it and tell you how much you owed, and it didn't even need a person involved.
Blew my mind.
Yeah, and you're starting to see more and more of those kind of things. A lot of those first McDonald's when they came out with their little kiosk things, I think that's been a total failure for them. Yeah. But that's the harbinger of what's to come. So there's going to be whole swaths of jobs that are going to disappear from this. And so, it really comes down to education has to change to human. We're going to judge people by their performance. And what I mean by performance is, okay, you have a lot of knowledge now. What can you do with it?
Yeah. Well, a lot of that comes with just experience and age too. So I don't know if I can take a sophomore, let's say, that's, 15 years old, 16 years old, and say to them, hey, let's have you take your experiences and then, take what you learned in this class and put it in real life, because they just don't have the depth of knowledge yet. They haven't lived life yet.
I think it's really true. And actually what's funny about all this is that we're talking about this cutting edge stuff. But you just said depth of knowledge. I don't even know if you picked that up or not, but that's a huge thing in education. Depth of knowledge. And then the other thing is Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy basically, says there are certain things that are like foundational in learning, which is like the stuff that like the little factoids that you'd see you'd use on Jeopardy,
right?
You know, which multiple choice kind of tests do really well. And then what happens is as you get higher on Bloom's taxonomy, that things get more difficult. And the top level is synthesis. Like, okay, I have all this information that I've gathered through all my educational experiences. Now I can take it and use it in a different domain. And that's what really you should be aiming for in education. But it's very difficult. And it's very difficult because people expect traditional education says, oh, those really, you know, knowing all the formulas and knowing all the calculations and knowing all these rudimentary facts about different processes is really important. But when you look at like the technology that we can put in our hand, any formula or anything I need to learn, I can look it up on my phone.
Yeah, it's at your fingertips. I mean, I guess the other part of it too is, if I get, I love AI. I love where we're going with all this. To me, it's fascinating, right? I'm like you, thinking forward. Where I get a little concerned is about when it comes to education and what schools should be doing. And educators listening right now are like, this guy is off the wall when he says this, is that I want more about relationship building.
Oh, yeah.
I think you look at when you leave high school and you go to college, and I don't know if that's the route anyone should take anymore. I'm seriously, I mean that. And we can talk about that on another day on another podcast. But, you know, it really is in the real world, it is about your relationships that you have, how well you manage them, how you prioritize them. It's not just is out there, right? So if I want to become an expert in anything, it's at my fingertips, like you talked about, right?
Yep.
So that is really not important to me. It's how you manage, how you live, what you prioritize. You know, what are you going to choose? Are you going to stay late night at the office to work on something? Are you going to work from home late night to work on something? Or are you going to be more like, they'll do it. Someone else will do it. I'm just going to go hang out with my friends tonight.
Yeah, I really think that, I mean, I remember talking to my one of my youngest kids. I can actually see it. We were walking into a gas station, and he was just at the age where he was starting to learn to read. And I said, you know, once you learn to read, they can never, ever take that away from you. You can always learn. You can always get knowledge. And I think that's more true than ever. That was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So now, with the advent of technology, it's all there if you want to learn it. And so, you know, one of the things that we should be fixating on is how well are you at learning?
Right.
I mean, you switched careers, you know, at your relatively young age.
Yeah, you tried to out me how old I was.
Yeah, I did.
In the 80s.
But you switched careers, and so you've had to learn a whole new field. And I actually am pretty impressed by that, because it isn't intuitive. It's just like if I were to switch and go in, I have some of the skills that I could, move into journalism, but the things that I need to do, I would have to learn those things. And so to me, that's one of the things that we should be looking at, teaching kids, like, okay, how do you access this information? How do you verify it? How do you, use it in different ways? But that's hard to do. That's hard to do for educators who are, stuck in like this traditional mode of what education should be.
Well, we should give at least listeners, again, thanks for joining us today on the Inside Outside podcast. I'm John Gonzalez. Jeff Bailey is the other co-host, and I'm just following the lead. I'm a semi-retired journalist, learning about this education world. Jeff, one thing I think we could probably offer here, and I would love your perspective on this, is what should be removed from traditional assessment methods, and which things should be added? I think this is a really good question that you and I in a prep, and I was reading through it going, like, what? That's a good question.
Well, like I said, we've been talking about this for a year. So, there are a couple different types of assessment. There's formative assessment and there's summative assessment. And
formative and what?
Formative and summative.
Okay.
So if those sometimes get people confused. Okay. Formative, I look at it as like, as a teacher, I'm using that to form my opinion of what you know or what you understand. Mm-hmm. Summative is like, I'm summing up what you know. It's a summary. Like, oh yeah, if we were talking about, oh yeah, John really has figured this podcast thing out. He can use it in lots of different ways. He can troubleshoot it. He really has a good knowledge. That would be like most teachers would consider that like the unit test. We still talk about the unit test in this a lot.
Right.
Formative assessments are the day-to-day things. Like, if you make the same error 35 times, we know you're not getting it. So as a teacher, you should be looking at like, okay, Johnny's made the same error 35 times. Now, as a teacher, my job is to figure out why he's making that mistake and then help him realize why he's making that mistake so he can go forward and do well on the summative assessment.
Go see the tutor. That's what I did.
Go see the tutor.
When I took Algebra 2 last summer, whenever that was.
That's still a funny story.
And I just couldn't get, I was like 35 times. I just could not get this formula. I could not figure this thing out. Went down to the tutor, and the first tutor was terrible. The second tutor, it's funny because it was not to be sexist. So the guy just was like talking over my head. Right. And then I talked to a woman who actually could understand what level I was and what I was having trouble with. Right. And she helped me solve it. Boom, I got it after that.
So what you're talking about, that it's really not the male-female thing. I really don't believe that. Yeah. What it really is this traditional idea of education. And so you think back to when you were in school.
Yeah.
It was, we give you all the information, you take a test, and then we know if you learned it or not.
Right.
The new type of education is just what we talked about. You, as a teacher, you're making assessments every day. You're forming an opinion about every one of your students, but like, what do they know? What don't they know? And then the next day you're saying, okay, half of you kids don't get it, so we're going to go back over that. And while we're doing that, you guys can challenge yourself. You guys who do get it, you can challenge yourself in a different way. So that's a challenge. I mean, that's when you think about that with 30 kids in your class, that's a big challenge. I think that's why the change doesn't happen very, very often. But that's where it's going. So that when you get to the summative assessment, it's like, I know all my kids are going to pass because we've done all this work leading up to it. So it's like a step ladder. You just know, and the teacher's going in lockstep. So that's really the fundamental change. How you assess those learning are really up to the teacher. When I talk to teachers about this, as part of my job, I'm telling them, this is giving you this is freeing you up. You no longer have to make sure that they can get that one question on the test right, because what you're doing is you're assessing them all along. You know what questions they're going to get wrong or which questions they're going to get right. So you have an opportunity to reteach that. So that's really the fundamental change that has to happen with assessment. But that's hard to let go of because the traditional way is easy and it's comfortable.
I would love to talk to you in another future podcast, and we should write this one down, about how teachers understand student behavior and whether they can assess that they've learned that unit or whatever. Like if the building block, if you got like the example you said, half of them were over here, half of them were over there. Well, okay, you had to assess that, not just through actual testing,
right?
But through, did they grasp this concept, right?
Right.
And then, so you have to have some ability to like understand human behavior, right? As a teacher.
Absolutely. And actually, so like I said, we've worked on this quite a bit. So we're actually moving next year to a 3-tiered grading system, 3 categories. So it won't be like writing is 40% and tests are 40%. Yeah. And some teachers would have 6 or 7 or 8 categories. Now we're going to have 3: formative assessment, summative assessment, and then the last one is going to be executive functioning. Okay. Executive functioning is a really interesting one because the other thing teachers get caught up on is, how do you teach? Sometimes teachers feel like, I got to teach responsibility. You got to turn that stuff in on time. And so sometimes when we're assessing kids, we're grading them based on things like, did they turn it in on time? Was it written neatly? Well, those aren't really assessments of learning. Those are really assessments of how are you going to function in the world.
Right.
And so now we're saying, okay, we're taking that out of your assessment of whether you're learning what you need to learn, but we're making it a category saying, we also know that we have to teach you to be a person who does good, high quality work. You know how to turn things in on time. And so this system really is built to assess students in lots of different ways. I don't know if that actually answered your
No, it didn't. But that's okay.
Your question or not.
We can answer that another day.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the wrap. That's the wrap. People are listening. Go like, okay, they're rambling now. Let's move on.
Well, there's so much in this.
I know.
That's the whole thing. Is, and there's going to be a shift. And actually, we can make another episode about the shift in what kind of assessments.
We just came up with 3 new podcasts in this last half hour.
It's actually good to have these conversations. But no, I just those items, just switching the mindset, because what happens with that conversation, okay, the formative assessments, when a principal or another teacher looks at that grade book and says, okay, I see your summative assessment. I see, 30% of your kids, failed. You can start looking at those formative assessments and start saying, well, when did that occur? And really, as a teacher, they should be changing their instruction as they're going along based on what they're seeing from their students. And those assessments, we're going to take those grades out of the grade book that are filler. Mm-hmm. There's lots of things. I did it as a teacher too. Sometimes I need to make sure they did something today. I'm going to give them homework. So it's got to be much more thoughtful. And I think that's really what is going to happen in education. Because of AI, we're going to be forced to be more thoughtful in our assessment, mm-hmm. so that we can make sure that we're moving kids along in real activities, real things where they're going to show what they're going to learn.
Right.
And this is not at all where I thought we were going to end up today, but where we're going to go is we're going to need to have developed different modes of assessment, and opening up those assessments will be, just as difficult as the rest of this, because we have to build capacity. That we've talked about building capacity with our teachers and with our students to use technology. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're going to have to do. So we're going to have to shift this thinking to, we're assessing all the time, and we're trying to see where all kids are at. And then how are we going to do that so it's not, drill and kill, which is what lots of schools have spent the entire first 20 years of this century.
I've never heard that phrase, but I'm sure it's common in education.
You've never heard drill and kill?
No. Well, I'm learning so much today.
It's based on the standardized testing idea, because remember, it was no child left behind.
Oh,
every kid's going to pass the test. So we got very factual stuff that we're going to get through. That's going to change because AI can defeat that.
It can be defeated.
It can be defeated, which is one of my favorite things about AI, I guess.
Well, folks, I think that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for tuning in. You can follow that guy, Jeff Bailey, at HeyBailey23. I was going to give the Twitter handle for our podcast, but it doesn't exist.
It's at AI at AIEDU.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Because what you have in your
not AI. Geez,
what you have in your Twitter profile, it says this account does not exist. So if you want,
I won't promise you folks anything. The 7 of you that are listening to this right now, I promise you.
I think we have 8.
We'll get that squared away.
You can follow me at WC Gonzo or Michigan Gonzo. WC Gonzo is my education. Michigan Gonzo is where I have fun. This is fun, though.
This is fun, yo.
This is fun too.
But so next time we're going to talk about those different types of assessment that we can do, and to me those are the big game changers. But it's going to be a heavy lift.
All right, folks, are you ready for the heavy lift? We are. We'll see you next week on the Inside Outside podcast.
Take care. Bye.